Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vaidyanatadaine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Ram Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram, Jaya Jagannath, Jagannath, Baldeva, Jaya Subhadra, Jaya Radha, Madhava, Radha, Madhava, Radhe, Radha, Madan Mohan, Radha, Madan Mohan, Radhe, Radhe, Narsingh, Radhe, Narsingh, Radhe,
Okay, are they done?
Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Jayo Prabhupada, 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 Jayo Jayo Prabhupada, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol.
As soon as you're done talking there, I'll
Hare
hit the
Krishna.
button there.
Krishna, Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you. Vinod Prabhu, Lakshmi Mataji, thank you so much. And
Very
we have,
nice kirtan.
SrutaKirti Prabhu with us. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, please accept our humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna. Obeisances, all glories of Prabhupada.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you. So we're all ready this evening?
Yes. All well, Prabhuji. As good we could be in lockdown at home. We are.
Okay. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachanani Visesa San Krishna Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So for this evening, I was going to talk about one of my favorite topics, Prasadam.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada and Prasadam. We had class. These weekends, I also have an afternoon class or morning class for Moscow devotees. So that was our topic, was Prasadam. So I'll continue with that. As soon as I joined Srila Prabhupada, of course, you have to plug in the computer, I think, my computer. As soon as I joined Srila Prabhupada, the very first day, we went into Prabhupada's sitting room in New Vrindavan. And he stayed on what was called Madhuban Farm. It was a very small little farmhouse. And we went in there about 5 o'clock in the morning. And Kirtanananda Swami introduced me. And he said, "This is SrutaKirti Das. He's going to be your servant." He said he's a very good cook, but he doesn't know how to massage. So the very next day, Prabhupada flew from Pittsburgh to Dallas. So when we arrived in Dallas, he showed me how to use the cooker. And that was a 3-day process. I'll get, during the course of this talk, I'll get you a picture. Most of you, I think, have seen Prabhupada's cooker. And of course, when I became his servant, it was the first time I had ever seen such a device. It's a brass 3-tier cooker. And on the inside, it was tin. So my first few days with Prabhupada were in Dallas Temple. Same temple is there now on Gurley Street. It's on this side. Yes, it's on Gurley Street, and Prabhupada had a full apartment there where he stayed. So what he did, and this was also going to be the first time I gave Srila Prabhupada a massage. So I actually had to learn everything. And over the next 3 days, Prabhupada gave me instructions on how he liked massage and how to use this cooker. So what he did was, I gave him massage on the kitchen floor. He sat on the He sat on a straw mat on the kitchen floor. And of course, as I learned right away, the process was I sat behind him, also cross-legged. We were both cross-legged on the floor. And before we did that, he showed me how to set up the cooker. So he was very, the shock. I hit something by mistake. Please forgive me there. That went on Facebook. So anyway, this cooker, of course, it 3 tiers. The bottom, of course, is where you put the water, where the dal would be cooked. And then the next 2 levels, there would be cut up vegetables and also a container with the rice. And the rice would steam in that top container. So once we walked into the kitchen, he was on one side of the kitchen. I was just 6 feet away, about 2 meters away on the other side. He told me we had the container with the rice, and he told me to wash the rice. And while I was doing that, he was cutting up the vegetables. And so I went to the kitchen sink, and he's cutting vegetables across from me. And I just swished the rice around in the water. As we learned very early, as soon as I went into the temple, the rice we'd wash 3 times. So I put water into the container, started moving the rice around, and I poured the water off. And then I put more water in there. Again, started to stir the rice around to rinse it again. And he's on the other side of the kitchen, he's cutting vegetables. And as soon as I started to pour the water off, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm washing the rice for about 3 times." He said, "Once is enough." As I would learn over the course of the time I was with him, that's how he dealt with me. I know Prabhupada had different standards, different ways he trained people in cooking and in doing all the different activities in devotional service. With me, he had what I considered a very casual approach. And that was the first part of it, was saying once was enough. He, one time, years later, 2 years later in Vrindavan, right here at Krishna Balaram Temple in Prabhupada's room, sitting room, where every evening he would give darshan to his disciples and also any locals that wanted to come in. He was sitting one evening, and of course here in Vrindavan in particular, and with us in general in Krishna consciousness, he always stressed minimizing bodily activities, and minimizing our eating, minimizing our sleeping. And while he was speaking, and he was looking at the people in the room, and he said, "Just like my servant," he said, "SrutaKirti," he said, "he prepares my whole lunch, 45 minutes. He said, not that it takes hours and hours to make lunch." He said, "Isn't that right, SrutaKirti?" So I sat there and I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." And I said, "And while the lunch is cooking in the kitchen," I said, "you're getting your massage." And he said, "Yes, massage and lunch, 45 minutes, whole thing finished." He said, "Not that so much time is spent taking care of the body." So part of that, as he was training me as his servant, was that the lunch was supposed to be prepared quickly, just within an hour, everything done. Not that all morning I was doing different things for his lunch, but within 1 hour it could be done. He considered that very good. And for me, of course, what I had to learn was that the cooker was in the kitchen. I wasn't. After those 3 days, Prabhupada never took massage in the kitchen again. The kitchen was always somewhere else. Sometimes it was in a different building. Sometimes it was in the same building. Sometimes just down the hall. Sometimes it was far away. But that's where this cooker would be that I set up every day. And to set up the cooker, it took 15 minutes to a half hour, make a little chapati dough and set up the cooker. course, the way he showed me, in the bottom of this cooker, we put the dal, and generally it was split mung dal, and you would put enough water in it. And then the top 2 tiers, in the middle tier was all vegetables, just cut up vegetables. And in the top tier was this katuri, like a large katuri, that you would have the rice in, and that would be covered. And then you would fit some more vegetables even there because the lid was rounded. So you would even jam some vegetables around the sides of that container and on top of that container. And the trick was that this cooker would be in this room for an hour and a half while you were giving Prabhupada his massage. So those of you that are familiar with cooking, which is, I'm sure, most all of the ladies and a few of the men perhaps, not too many, know that vegetables don't take very long before they're cooked. So in order for these vegetables not to become overcooked and mushy, and for the dal not to dry out and burn, this flame was very low. It was actually like a slow cooker. So anyway, over those first 3 days, he fine-tuned that for me so that I knew how to use this cooker. And that was one of the things that fortunately I did successfully while I was at Prabhupada as his servant. I guess after me, he didn't have, after I left him in the middle of 1975, his next servants, they didn't do a lot of cooking. Hari Sari, no cooking at all. He couldn't figure out how to use the cooker. So for me, it was actually very nice. And for Prabhupada, it was one of the main things that the servant did was massage and cook. And Prabhupada, he gave many instructions, Srila Prabhupada. I say they were like very Ayurvedic instructions about lifestyle, about eating, how we conducted ourselves. So a lot of them had to do with cooking. One time he said to me that he said, you eat your main meal, he said, when the sun is highest in the sky. So he had his lunch, that was his main meal. He would have a light breakfast, and in the evening, he could eat again, sometimes even puris. He would ask for puris and sabji, sometimes muri, puffed rice. But his main meal was always there, and it was always very regular: rice, chapatis, dal, and sabjis, 3-4 different sabjis. So he said, he would say like that. So that, of course, is an Ayurvedic principle that the higher the sun is, the better is your digestion. His morning walk, of course, also was another Ayurvedic principle. The way, just as the sun was rising, Prabhupada was right out there, whether he was in the park or it was on the beach. The walk itself, of course, was very good for health, but then getting that morning sun. And as he said to me once during massage, he said, the morning sun, he said, gives you energy. And the afternoon sun takes away your energy. So Prabhupada was very aware of taking care of his body. As he said to us, devotee, we don't ignore the body. He said the body we use in Krishna's service. So we keep it very, try to keep very fit. Of course, when there's difficulties, he said we just accept them and go on. He said, but to stay healthy, again, was one of the very first principles that when Prabhupada wrote down the order of importance. He wrote first thing in importance was your health. The next thing, of course, was chanting. And then after that was service. So it was in these orders. So health is foremost, because without being healthy, nothing else can happen. So traveling with him as his servant, this was important because also eating regularly. He also told me that cooking for yourself. He said, best thing is you cook for yourself. He said, because no matter how bad it is, you'll think it's good. He said, that's just normal. That's just nature. If you cook for yourself, you'll think it's good. Also Ayurveda, he said, first principle is you have to like what you're eating. Because if you don't like it, you'll not digest it. even if something very healthy, very good for your constitution, so many things. But if you don't like it, when you put it in your mouth, that also is bad for digestion. Another thing he told me was when it's time for prasadam, we know Prabhupada was very regular. Wherever we traveled in the world, generally his massage would start right around 11:30. And by 1 o'clock, 1:15, he was having his lunch. So what would happen, I would prepare everything, start at 11 o'clock. Just before I went in for massage, I would turn that flame on the cooker. Chapati dough is made. Now everything's in the cooker and it's very slowly steaming. So then I would massage Prabhupada, and that could vary in time. It could be 1 hour, 15 minutes. It might even go for 2 hours, but generally it was an hour and a half. And then after that, after finishing massage, Prabhupada would put his hand out, also this Ayurveda in his hand. I put a spoonful, a little teaspoonful of mustard oil. Because on his head, Prabhupada's massage was sandalwood oil on his head. He said you have to keep a cool head, right? And then rest of the body was mustard oil. So at the end of the massage, he would put his hand out, and I just pour a little mustard oil into his hand, and then he would take his finger and he would oil all the gates of his body. So that was the last part of his massage. Then he would go off to the bathroom. So now I had approximately 15 to 20 minutes. During that time, Prabhupada would bathe. Same thing with his bath, was Ayurvedic style. He bathed from a bucket. There was no shower overhead. He didn't take a shower. 1 bucket of water with his lota. He'd pour some water on. Then he had a few soaps that we used. Generally, we would try to get a hold of Mysore sandalwood soap. So that was always the preferred soap. We didn't have that. Sometimes it was Chandrika soap, Ayurvedic Chandrika soap. So he put the water on, then he would soap everything up, and then he would use the rest of the bucket of water to wash off. So after that, of course, he would go into the bedroom where I had laid out his fresh clothing on the bed, laid everything across the bed, his kopin, dhoti, kurta. So he put that on, then he'd go back to his sitting room, sit down, and he put on tilak. Every day, this was every day, this is what would go on. Put on his tilak very nicely. You see some photos of Prabhupada applying tilak to his forehead, maybe 1 or 2 videos like that. As he did it, you could see, just seeing Prabhupada, everything he did was Krishna conscious. How he did it, just watching him put on tilak, you could become Krishna conscious, just seeing how he did it. Everything was done with attention, with consciousness. So after he put on his tilak, then he would say Gayatri. So the perfection of cooking for me as his servant was when he was finished Gayatri, you would be coming in with the plate of prasadam. Because he said, as soon as it's time to eat, he said the stomach is already creating digestive juices. And if prasadam is late, then that spoils the digestion. So all these little things he would say, which meant as his servant, you were supposed to know what you were doing. You had to be attentive and you had to get things accomplished on time. So this is what it was to be his servant. So every day, now wherever it was, this is what you did. If he was in Delhi one day and the next day went to Vrindavan, in Delhi, that was same timeline that would be in Vrindavan the next day. And if you traveled 22 hours and ended up halfway around the world, immediately he adjusted, he set his watch, 6 o'clock in the morning, he's on his morning walk. Didn't matter where he was, didn't matter how many hours he had flown, what time of the morning or late at night we got in, immediately he adapted to the next schedule. And again, it worked. For Prabhupada, it worked very well. So So then serving him prasadam, of course, as I said, breakfast, like we discuss these things, people ask about Ekadasi, what did Prabhupada eat for Ekadasi, how did he break his fast? Well, breaking fast was easy the day after Ekadasi. Breaking fast was just like the day before. He gave class, then he went to his room and he had breakfast. So whenever class was over, that's when he broke his fast. And breakfast was always basically local fruits, whatever fruits were there. Sometimes he would have fruit juices, if you could make some fruit juices. And there was always a sweet, every meal, breakfast, lunch, and evening. If you took in the evening, there would always be, along with puris and some sabjis, some sandesh. If nothing else, there would be sandesh. One of the first things he told me when I became his servant was that. He said, you make nice sandesh. He said, when you travel even, he said, even without refrigeration, it will keep for a week, which meant sandesh is dry and it shouldn't be moist, because moisture, then it won't keep that long. So he said like that. So even in traveling, he liked me to travel with the sandesh, because he always liked to have a sweet. And lunchtime, as I was describing, of course, chapatis were there every day. I was saying Prabhupada described, he said different things at different times. This time he said 2 kinds of prasadam. He said there's opulent and sumptuous. Now, we looked up sumptuous. Sumptuous means very royal, even grand, expensive. Opulent, the way Prabhupada described it, he said opulent means ghee and sugar. He said that's opulent. He said an opulent prasadam is meant for the deities. So this was the deities, just like we know Raj Bhog offering is very opulent. It's Raj Bhog, that's what it is, it's opulent. He said in sumptuous, he said means very tasty. He said in the devotees, they should have very sumptuous prasadam. In other words, very tasty prasadam. He told me that prasadam should be so tasty that a devotee doesn't even think about eating outside of the temple. That's how tasty prasadam should be. Now we're talking about when Prabhupada was here in the 70s. So he had, his formula was everyone, all the devotees should eat in the temple. And at that time, of course, Los Angeles was the world headquarters. Los Angeles was the biggest temple. And as it developed, by the time I was with Prabhupada 72, 73, 74, they were buying one apartment complex after another. Each complex had 20, 25 apartments in it, and they were all filled with the various grahastas and departments. BBT was there, the art department was there. So all these apartments were filled with grahastas. So of course, gradually, questions would be asked, and devotees were eating at their homes. Devotees wanted to start doing deity, they would have their deities at their homes. But Prabhupada said no. He said the temple, everything should be focused at the temple. He said deity worship should be at the temple. He said in the eating should be at the temple. He said that way all the maintenance, again, these maintenance activities would be minimized. He said not that you have to spend so many hours doing things at home, because his concentration was on us spreading Krishna consciousness. So he liked that devotees all could eat at the temple. The devotees would go to Mangal Artik at the temple, chant their rounds at the temple. So of course that was in those days where everyone, all the focus was at the temple. And of course, Los Angeles, as I said again, it was the headquarters. In the West, devotees would travel to New Dwarka, LA, to learn deity worship from the head pujari. Head pujari was Shilavati. Mataji, Shilavati Mataji, she was head pujari. And devotees would come from other temples all around the US and other places to learn the standard of deity worship. Because as Even now, if you see Rukmini Dwarkadish, very beautifully, always very beautifully dressed. The Shadam is always first class. The offerings are first class. The Jari room is first class. Everything is very nice. So when I was with Prabhupada, sometimes he would stay in this Los Angeles for a month. I remember, I guess in 1973, he stayed there week after week after week. It was a good place to do his translating work. The weather was very pleasant. And while there, of course, Shalavati, who was head Pujari, we were Westerners. Huh? We were all Westerners. So Prabhupada sometimes saw that we had certain mentality. He said, Westerners, we have the changing mentality. So different things happened while we were there. Shalavati, she was always, as many devotees were eager to know, what was Prabhupada doing? What did Prabhupada do today? What did Prabhupada say? If I would go downstairs from my servants' quarters to get something, there would just be devotees in the hallway saying, what's Prabhupada doing? This is how we live. We live to hear about Srila Prabhupada, what Prabhupada said, what Prabhupada did. So she was asking me about serving Prabhupada lunch. How did I serve him lunch? So I told her. So of course, serving Prabhupada lunch, that was the busiest part of the day for me. I do that whole section from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. This is when I prepared everything for his lunch, gave him a massage, went back and finished preparing, set up the plates, distributed his maha afterwards. So it was a very busy time. So she said, well, how did you serve him lunch? So I told her, of course, when being with Prabhupada, everything was done in a certain way. So of course, when Prabhupada was saying his Gayatri, I was setting up his plate. Usually we had silver katuri and thali. So I put out the thali, put a little vegetable. That was another thing he said when I first became his servant. Don't put too much prasadam on the plate. He said just a little bit of each preparation. He said, if you put too much in there, he said, also, I'll lose my appetite. So everything, he knew exactly what he wanted. And of course, our business was to know that and to follow his instructions. So I would always just put, there was a small katuri of rice, katuri of dal, all the sabjis. One of the favorites, if it was available, was of course bitter melon. And that you would fry by itself after everything was done. You would just use your small wok, which was the lid, put some ghee in there, little salt and turmeric, and just fry them up like the size of a coin until they get a little crispy. So that was there every day. And of course, in the bitter preparation, you ate first, because that again increases the appetite and starts the digestion. So he did all these things. It was a formula. So then I told her, well, I set up his plate, and of course I make one chapati, because Prabhupada's waiting in the other room. So you roll out one chapati, you cook it, it puffs up. Chapati had to puff up. If it doesn't puff up, it's rejected. You don't bring it into Prabhupada. So it would puff up, and then you would just a little bit of ghee across the top, but you didn't even let it collapse. You just, if it could stay puffed up, that was first class. So then I would run into the room, and as soon as Prabhupada would see me come in through the front door, the door of his room, he would get up from behind his desk, walk over to, like in Los Angeles, his choki, the table was on the ground, just this high off the ground. And that was against the wall. And his little straw mat would be right in front of that. So he would be sitting facing the wall. It wasn't the other way around. He faced the wall as he took prasadam. So he would come in and sit down, and I would put the plate down on the table and offer obeisances. And if the chapati's still puffed up, you could just see him go, push it down, and of course start breaking off. So he started with the chapatis. Rice was going to come after all the chapatis were finished. Every day was like this, every day. But that was just one chapati. So I would offer obeisances, run out of the room, back into the, wherever the kitchen was, if it was in the servant's room, if it was in a kitchen, make another chapati. So then cook that chapati, the chapati puffs up, you put it on a little tray, put a little ghee on the top, you run back into the room, slide it onto his plate, offer obeisances, and you run back out of the room. So you might do this 4 times, 5 times, 6 times sometimes. While I was with him, I consider those years, I was with him from September of 72 all the way into the middle of 1975. His health, I think, was as good as it ever was during his travels. He was eating, like I say, sometimes in the evening, 8 o'clock at night, he would tell me to make puris and potato eggplant sabji. Another day, he would say make parathas. Some other times, puffed rice, and always a glass of hot milk, sweetened hot milk. So during lunch, over the next 15 minutes or so, back and forth with chapatis, offering obeisances and leaving the room. So I told that to Shilavati. So a few days go by, and I went downstairs one day, and Shilavati says, "SrutaKirti, you know what I'm doing?" I said, "No, what are you doing?" She says, "I'm bringing the deities, Rukmini, Dwarkadish, and Jagannath, I'm bringing them one puri at a time." So she had changed bringing in the plates at a Rajbhog offering to just putting one puri on each plate, all the 3 for the 3 altars. Then she'd go back into the kitchen and make hot puris, and she'd come back into the deity room and put hot puris on their plates. So of course I never directly said anything, but immediately I thought, I have to tell this to Prabhupada. This just doesn't sound right to me. So of course I would find my time in the afternoon, never said anything during lunch, never brought up anything. Prasadam, when Prabhupada took Prasadam, there was nothing else to talk about. Prasadam, he honored Prasadam. Sometimes when I would come in with the plate, he would have devotees in the room. It might be breakfast or it could be lunch, and maybe he would be talking with the temple president or GBC or sannyasi or something, or a few of them. And as soon as I would come into the plate, Prabhupada would get up from behind the desk, not from the sitting place. Soon as a prasadam arrived, Prabhupada would get up, and then he would walk over to his plate and he would sit down. The devotees would still be there. So then he would get down, sit down behind the plate, and he would grab something from his plate. And then he would come here, then he would hand them, whoever was there, 1, 2, 3, he would give them a little prasadam and say, "Now you can go." That was it. Conversation over. Prasadam is here. And then Prabhupada just ate quietly, no conversations. So one afternoon I said, "So Prabhupada," I said, I told him what Shilavati was doing. I said, "She asked me how you were eating lunch, and then I told her, and she started doing the same thing for the deities, bringing them one puri at a time." As soon as I said it, he said, "That's nonsense," he said. And of course, he had a line he would say very often, "You Westerners, always changing." He said, "Never satisfied, always have to change." He said, "It's your disease." He said, "It's American disease, the Western disease. Always have to change, think you can make things better." He said, "You can't do that." He said, "Once you bring in the offering," he said, "you leave, you have to give them 15, 20 minutes to eat before you can go in again." He said, "Tell her, don't do this nonsense." He said, "Don't change. But don't change what I've given." So of course I told her, and there was no problem. She complied. So then we're there a little while. And we're staying there, myself, secretary, Sanskrit editor. So what I cooked for Prabhupada was certainly not enough for all of us, not enough for Prabhupada, 3 or 4 other devotees. So we would also get prasadam from the temple, and we would get the Mahaprasadam sometimes. And one day there's these sweets that came. So we're having our lunch, and there are these sweets that they had made. They were making for the deities, the Rukmini Dwarkadish again. So these sweets were, well, they were also a concoction. And they had dried fruits and nuts. They were blended up in the blender, and then they were mixed with some puffed rice. Now this puffed rice was not even from India kind of puffed rice. This was from Quaker Oats puffed rice in the USA. There was these big puffed kernels of rice. So they had them. But this was the American way, was to figure out how to do things tasty, faster, quicker, easier. So they were making these sweets and they were giving them to the deities. They were offering them to the deities instead of rasgullas and sandesh and gulab jamun. So they brought over the maha one day. So me and my troublemaker ways, sometimes I would make a little trouble. So for Prabhupada's lunch, I had on his plate, next to his lunch, I had his sandesh. Always had to have rasgulla or sandesh or gulab jamun. So I had 2 sandesh, and right in the same thing were 2 of these sweets, these dried fruit nut sweets that they were making at the temple. And I brought them in. So Prabhupada ate his whole lunch. Then he had his sweet. Then I came in to get his plate, and he said, "What are these sweets?" I said, Prabhupada, they're from the temple. I said, they're giving him. I said, they're maha from the deity's plate. He said, who is concocting these things? He said, why? He said, why you always have to change? He said, why do they always have to change? He said, there's concoction. He said, this is nonsense. He said, tell them to stop. He said, I showed everything. He said, nice Bengali sweets are there. He mentioned the Bengali sweets. He said, we have sandesh, rasgulla, rasmalai, gulab jamun, like that. He said, this is what the deity should have. He said, tell them to stop this concoction. He said, this changing. He said, changing what I've shown for the deity worship. He said, this will destroy the society. He said, making these changes will destroy our society. So he was always aware of this change disease. He said that we had. He even criticized, he said, you Americans, he said, if you have, just like we know how you buy these like yogi pants, that, they'll be 8 inches too long. He said, in India, he said, you just roll it up. He said, but no, not in America. He said, you take it and you cut it off. He said, and throw it away. So he everything he saw about the Western culture, he said, was just waste, to waste things and to change things, always having to change things. So these things I would get to see on a regular basis as pertaining to prasadam. They asked me in the class earlier, what did Prabhupada think of different regional preparations? So I said, Prabhupada was he grew up eating his Bengali khana. He liked like I said, the one thing, of course, he learned to really appreciate were chapatis. This was not something in Bengal was very popular with chapatis. But Prabhupada every day had chapatis. But when he had his lunch, even his lunch, everything was done in a certain fashion. So he always started out with the chapatis, and then when they were done, and when he had enough chapatis, he didn't say anything to me. He would just just move his head. That meant no more chapatis. You know, it was a very simple, his movements, you could see just by his movements, you knew what to do. I said, Prabhupada here in his rooms here, he called me in the room. And he told me, he said, first class servant, he said, he knows what to do without being asked. He said, second class, you ask him and he does it. Third class, he said, you ask him and he doesn't do it, or he does it begrudgingly. So this was, again, his choice of words was always very demonstrative, very good. And in Vrindavan, as I said, from the very beginning with Prabhupada, I learned how to see his movements, how he looked, because just by his look, he could give you an instruction. So in Vrindavan here, he would ring his bell, and I'd come in the room, and he would look up at the fan. So if the fan wasn't on, it just meant turn on the fan. It was that simple, without him even speaking a word. He would look at the French doors, which meant open the French doors or open the curtains on the doors. So in this way, everything was minimal. He wanted you always understood what to do. Well, cooking for him was also like that. You just had to know what Prabhupada liked. So in Los Angeles, they got those instructions, how they learned it with the deity worship, very, very careful to do everything consciously and regularly, and not be changing, going up and down. Someday you make 15 preparations, the next day you make 5 preparations. No, everything should be very regulated. Of course, right now we have a big crisis going on. So many things in many temples, I know even the garlands, deities are getting minimum amount of garlands. So these things have happened, but otherwise everything was to be continued very nicely, never decreasing, never decreasing. So let me see. And so these were the first days teaching me. He didn't show me many different preparations. Vegetables, he showed me in the beginning, whatever was there, what spices was there, he just had me add a little of this. And in those days, we had cumin, of course, we had our turmeric, little coriander, ground coriander, very little bit of chili. Then we didn't have fresh chili much, a little bit of chili, ground chili, red chili, but just a little bit. And of course, hing is there, sometimes mustard. So the very first day he showed me, the first chaunts he made had those in there, had cumin seed in there, had a little coriander, then a little, as that started to turn brownish, then a little bit of hing and a little bit of turmeric. So we made a fair-sized chaunts, and we poured some of it into the dal. So then there was some chaunts left from that. So then he said, get these vegetables. So we grabbed a few vegetables and threw them into the rest of the chaunts. So that one chaunts went into a wet preparation, and then it was used for a dry preparation. So he just had a way, very expert, very simple. As he said, Prabhupada, he told me in one evening, he said, I was an expert cook. He said, my sister, she was expert cook. He said, my sister, she learned from my mother. He said, but I just learned by watching. So this was Prabhupada's, and he said that about a few things. Just by watching, I learned. So this is, of course, the best kind of intelligence. You just see something and you know how to do it. So he said that in a kind of with pride, just by watching. And of course, Prabhupada, anyone that had any of his preparations could tell you everything, of course, was most wonderful. He showed me how to make parathas. Now this was in the evening. Imagine 8 o'clock at night. He came up to my room, and this again was in Los Angeles, had very nice facility because my room was in his quarters. It was an apartment, a flat. It was literally what you would say was a 2-bedroom apartment, 3-bedroom apartment. But his one room, the living room, was his sitting room. And then he had a nice large bedroom. Then there was another sitting room. And across the hallway was the servants' quarters. So that was my bedroom. And right before that was his bathroom. So with him walking around those quarters, he could go through his sitting room, through the hallway, past my room, the servants' room. The door was always open. Never had a shut door. There was no privacy there. Another thing I learned without him having to say anything, the door should be open. This was staying with Prabhupada. So in the evening, if he wanted, he would just walk right up to the servants' quarters. I'd be sitting there just chanting. If I was very fortunate, I'd be reading, sometimes just sitting there. So he'd come up, and so the one evening he came up and he said, "So, do you know how to make paratha?" I said, "No, Prabhupada." He said, "All right, I'll show you." He said, "You make chapati dough?" He said, "Then call me back." So for this paratha, he just showed me make chapati dough. So I made chapati dough, then I went and called him. So then we came back to the servants' quarters. Servants' quarters was a small room. And in that room was his kitchen. It was also my kitchen. I cooked. I prepared his meals in that same room where I slept. There was no running water in it. I had a bucket that I would keep fresh water in, and constructed a little shelf with a few cinder blocks and a piece of wood across it. And we had there in that apartment, there of course were gas lines, propane gas. It was direct gas line. It would hook up to a gas heat. But instead of gas heat, we had a 2-burner stove. So that was my kitchen. So he came into the room. He said, "Okay, so now we're both sitting on the floor. Now I have my little rolling pin, little spot to roll the chapatis." So he said, "Okay, instead of using flour, you're going to use ghee." He said, "Spread some ghee." He said, "Now you roll out." He said, "You put ghee on top of the ball, and you roll it out just like a chapati, but we do it with ghee." He said, "Now," so I did that. So he's giving me step-by-step instructions. So after doing that, he said, "Oh, now you spread more ghee." So he spread a little more ghee on it. He said, "Now you fold it in half." So I folded it in half. So now we have a semicircle. So he said, "Now you roll that out." So I rolled that out. He said, "Now spread a little more ghee." So I spread a little more ghee. He said, "Now you fold that over." So now it's folded in quarters. He said, "So now a little ghee on the top and you roll it out, it becomes like a triangle." So because it was a quarter kind of round, and it becomes just like a paratha. So that's 4 layers. And there's a lot of ghee in between. It's which will make it very flaky. So then we had the stove, had the little cast iron skillet on the stove. He said, "So put a little ghee on there." And then of course we put the paratha on there, flipped it over, a little more ghee on the top, flip it over a few times, becomes golden brown, starts to puff up a little bit. That was a paratha. So he came in and showed me these parathas one day. So then he had me make a little sabji. One of his favorite sabjis in the evening was eggplant potato. One evening he came in, well, this was always around 8 o'clock. He said, "Tonight," he said, "I'll show you how to make cabbage potato, how I like it." I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." So he had me cut. He would instruct. He would sit beside me on the floor and tell me what to do and let me do it. So then he had me cut the potatoes, little cubes, then the cabbage, just with the knife, just only using the knife and the head of cabbage shred. He said, very fine as you can shred with the knife, you do that. So then again, put some ghee in the wok. It was always ghee. Everything was with ghee. Some ghee in the wok, some spices, a mustard seed. They start popping, put in a little, your hing, your turmeric, like that. And then fry the potatoes. He said, and you can let them stick a little bit. They become a little crispy, right? Make them brownish. Then you put in the cabbage and the same thing. He said, and you just scrape like that. So he would show me these different preparations. And always with hot milk. Nighttime, always a glass of hot milk. And the hot milk had to be so hot, as soon as you had to boil it, and you would bring it into him, that was the last thing you did, was boil the milk, because the milk had to go into him boiling hot. Nothing cooler than that. Other times he had different people. One day brought milk. Prabhupada says, not hot enough, make it hot. So they left the room, they heated it up more, they bring it in, and Prabhupada said, it's not hot enough. And the devotee said, Prabhupada, it's hot. How do you know? He said, you're holding the cup. That meant it's not hot enough. It has to be so hot you can't hold the cup. Because he said milk, he said, is not a drink, it's food. He said, and it has to be sipped from the spoon. He would start out, put the spoon in, he would start out sipping it. He said, that way it digests properly. He said, if it's not hot enough, it turns to urine. So very specific, everything he knew exactly. There were certain things. Prabhupada was very liberal, he was very compassionate, but he was also could be very demanding in what he wanted, how he wanted it, particularly in his eating, because it's also all about health, keeping healthy. Because he ate very well. He ate, like I said, when I was with him, he generally had 3 meals a day. Breakfast was light, lunch was not so light, and in the evening could also be, they say sometimes puffed rice. One evening in Juhu, you know Juhu, it gets hot. So one evening he had puris, eggplant potato. So the next night he called me into the room. I offered obeisances, and he said, so tonight, he said, you make muri, the puffed rice. Muri meant puffed rice with peanuts. You again make the peanuts a little golden brown. You'll make a chance, turmeric, so you can see yellowish on the rice, and you just put it on low flame and you make it nice and crispy. Now that's puffed rice. He said, so tonight you make puffed rice. He said, because last night, he said, it was difficult for me to get up to translate. He said, because my dinner was heavy. So because he felt like he had a hard time getting up that night, the next night he wanted puffed rice. Of course, that only lasted one night. Then again, he would be eating puris and other things. So, but he made that statement, which again, I found Prabhupada could be, he was serious, but he was also funny in how he said things and did things, because everything seemed easy for him. Every night getting up at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning to do translating. But anyway, he made that point. But he also, of course, he liked puffed rice very, very much. One of his favorite preparations was puffed rice and peanuts. And again, with the hot milk. And the hot milk was always sweet. He never, when I was with him, I never put anything else in it. No nutmeg, no cinnamon, no turmeric, none of those things. No ghee. It was hot milk and sugar. And unless he wanted to say something to me. So again, in New Dwarka, one night he came in. As he passed by the servant quarters, and I was making he said, you can put honey in it tonight. When I put his sugar in, I wouldn't say it was a lot, but it was a decent amount. It was, again, and with different servants, he had different ways, different things he did. I think it was Sorry said, one of them was saying how when he put in the sugar, Prabhupada said it was too much. But he never said such a thing to me. I don't know if I always got it just right or he just accepted whatever it was. But this night at my room, he came up to me and he said, I just boiled the milk. And he said, put honey in it. I said, hey, yes, Prabhupada. I said, isn't that bad? I said, to put honey in something boiling. He said, just put the honey in it. Well, again, it was one of these situations where I would say something and he would say, just do it. Don't worry about it. He said, just do it. Just put the honey in, he said. So then one of those evenings, of course, for those of you that know the USA, most of you probably don't, but Los Angeles is on the West Coast, and just a 1-hour drive south of Los Angeles is Laguna Beach, where we have Panchatattva Temple now. So in those days, Panchatattva weren't there, deities, but deities were there. And Prabhupada went to spend the night there. So we get there in the daytime. Prabhupada gave a class. So now it's time for prasadam. Now Laguna Beach is California is its own, you know, within the USA, California is known as a very liberal. In that time, there were some of the first vegetarian restaurants in Los Angeles area. And many people were very health conscious there in Southern California. In Laguna Beach, the devotees were very, very health conscious. They didn't even like cooked food. They liked to eat raw foods, make big salads with alfalfa sprouts, things, very healthy things. And one of the things they didn't have in the temple, they had deities in the temple, but they didn't have sugar in the temple. As we know, sugar is a poison. White sugar is poison. So they didn't use sugar because it was just very bad. By some consider very bad, bad for your health, bad for everything. It's made sugar. So it's in the evening, it's about 8 o'clock, and Prabhupada rings his bell. And he's sitting with the temple president, leaders of the temple there, and he called me in. He said, so you can make me something for prasadam, some puris and vegetable. He said, and I'll have my hot milk. And he looked at me and he said, with sugar. He never asked specifically, you know, it's what I did all the time, but he said, with sugar. So I said, yes, Prabhupada. So I went into the kitchen, the temple kitchen, and I'm putting everything together, and then I boil his milk, and I'm asking the pujari there and the cook in the kitchen, I said, where's your sugar? And they said, oh, we don't have sugar. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have sugar? He says, we don't use sugar in this temple. I said, okay. So of course I did what I always did. I was like a little child, you know, just loving it, loving to see Prabhupada, loving to see Prabhupada's reaction to all these crazy things. So I went into the room and I said, Prabhupada, I said, I'm making your dinner. I said, I'm making your prasadam and hot milk. I said, but they don't have sugar. He said, what do you mean they don't have sugar? I said, well, they don't use sugar in this temple. They say sugar is bad for you. And Prabhupada said, what are they giving the deities? He said, the deities have to have sugar. He said, how can you have deity worship and not have sugar? He said, how can you serve the deities without sugar? He kept saying, how can they not have sugar? I said, Prabhupada, I don't know. He said, they must have sugar. I said, yes, Prabhupada. So he knew. Prabhupada knew everything. He always knew, and he knew just how to push the buttons and get to the root of what's going on in different places. So these things come up, they go on nowadays, the same thing, don't use this, don't use this, don't use this. But Prabhupada was always how to serve Krishna. That was always his thing, how to serve Krishna as best as possible. And of course, you all know the Bhog Arti song, huh? Before Rajbhog offering is chini puri, puris and sugar. There was another time I was in New Zealand with Prabhupada. This was beginning in 1973 in the temple there in Auckland, New Zealand. And there, Prabhupada stayed in what was the temple. The half a dozen or so devotees that lived there, they moved them outside, so Prabhupada had the quarters. And there were two of Prabhupada's sannyasis there. They were also very health conscious people. And Prabhupada, in this was some of the rare times, in the evening, he would actually take prasadam and he would just talk with them. He was very eager to instruct these devotees because he could understand that they were going to go off on their own, which they did, start their own group and everything in time. So Prabhupada could understand that, but he wanted them to know and to understand what Krishna consciousness was and how to spread Krishna consciousness according to his desire, according to what he had created. So he had them spend over a month with him as he traveled. So now they were back in New Zealand and Prabhupada was there. So it was our first night there. And Prabhupada called me in the room. And again, he asked for puris. Puris in itself were again considered bad because it was made with white flour. People in the West in general will say white flour is very bad for you. That's not whole grain. It's done this, it's done this. But what I learned and what Prabhupada ate, his puris, they were made with maida, white flour. So anyway, he asked for puris and sabji, and it was to be understood you would bring a sweet. Sweet was always there. That was automatic. Just like you have a plate, you have a sweet. So I prepared everything. It was our first day there. Now I'm in another temple I've never been to before. There's no sweets. And I bring in the prasadam, same thing. I would bring in one puri, then I'd run back out of the room, make another puri, bring it in. If he wanted more sabji, he'd ask for more sabji. And I'd just come back again with another puri, and then he'd go, okay. So then I go back in with the last puri, and he says, you don't have any sandesh? Oh, I became very upset. I said, I'm sorry, Prabhupada. I said, we just got here. I haven't had that. No, he said, that's okay. He said, I'm just asking. He said, you can bring me a bowl of sugar. I said, yes, Prabhupada. So I went back into the kitchen. They came back in with a bowl of sugar, just white sugar, and his puri. Now these sannyasis are sitting right in front of Prabhupada. They also never ate sugar. The sugar is Maya. And Prabhupada broke off a piece of puri, and he grabbed it, and you could hear it squishing into the sugar. Stuck it in the sugar, pops it in his mouth, and they're like, so that was Prabhupada. He always knew how to show us what Krishna consciousness was, huh? We had so many different attachments and ideas and understandings of what it meant to be Krishna conscious, but he would let us know that sometimes some of our ideas had nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. It was just our own mundane mentality. So he very happily kept poking his puri in this little bowl of white sugar and eating it, knowing that they never ate sugar. So, Hare Krishna, that was Prabhupada and some prasadam pastimes. I decided on this topic because being locked down, it seems the only thing we get to do is go in the kitchen and prepare offerings for Govardhan. So every day, more than ever, I've spent more time in the kitchen in the last 2 months, I think, than I did in the whole myself going into the kitchen and making various preparations. Even chapatis, making so many chapatis. Okay, are there any questions this evening before we? Oh, I see some questions here already. Wow. Thank you everyone for being here. Sandesh. Somebody's asking about Sandesh recipe. Yes, Prabhu, were you going to say something?
No, Prabhuji, it was so nice to again get back into 70s and hear that whole pastime of so much about prasadam. And it is very unique to hear how Prabhupada has had such unique traits for everything. It's just not about his walking, his putting tilak, his honoring prasadam, his understanding about this movement of the sun and the warmth of the milk. It is like he used to say about his Guru Maharaj, like a person from a Vaikuntha, you know. It is so amazing. And,
yes, being with Prabhupada is certainly, there was nothing better. There's, we say, it's all downhill from there. We only long for that association again, to be with him personally. He was, everything he did was inspirational, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. He could be very sarcastic sometimes in his humor. I found being with him, like I say, you can get an idea that he was very particular. So it created, you know, sometimes it could be difficult, but the payoffs were much nicer than anything we had to put out. And I continue to see Prabhupada's mercy all the time. Through all of his followers, I get the opportunity to share Prabhupada with them. And for me, it's a great blessing that Prabhupada has allowed me to do. Someone, I see a few questions here. Someone asked about the spicing. I think I mentioned I was not in any way an exceptional cook. But as Hari Kesha said last year at the Prabhupada Festival, we had 7 of Prabhupada's cooks there. And Hari Kesha very sweetly said that my cooking for Srila Prabhupada, he was very, very healthy, and he was during those times. Well, I got the benefit of that somehow or other. 3 times a day, I was preparing meals for Prabhupada everywhere in the West. And he never complained about anything I prepared, which in itself, looking back, I find very amazing that he was always satisfied. Out of all those years, hundreds and hundreds of meals, one time he yelled at me, and it was because I let someone else cook that wasn't qualified. So on the other hand, when Tamal Krishna glorified my cooking in my presence, Prabhupada just smiled and said, yes, SrutaKirti makes nice American prasadam. So I definitely, it was simple, but I think he liked eating simply, as he tells us we should eat simple. It's mode of goodness, it's good for your health. He said things shouldn't be too spicy, things shouldn't be oily at all, but even ghee, he said just a little bit of ghee. And he always stressed that we should all have a cup of milk, a cup of hot milk at least once a day in one form or another as an adult. And children twice that much. They need, very important to have dairy. So, so the spicing I used, as he showed me, I kind of mentioned in the beginning, was just cumin. Coriander was there in general, and hing, turmeric, and just a little bit of chili, red chili, crushed red chili, because we very rarely, in those days in the West in particular, we didn't have access to so many things, different spices. And so what was there, that's what we used. It's what he showed me, and it's what I did. So things basically, the taste was the taste of the vegetables themselves and a little bit of ghee. Everything always had ghee. He did not like steamed veggies, unspiced veggies. He liked things to be cooked nicely and with some spicing there. Yes, at his own regulations and time. Yes. But someone asked me for a recipe for sandesh. As far as I can remember, it's been a very long time since I made sandesh. But in making it, of course, you get your curd, you hang it, you press it, so you have a nice paneer. And the trick in making that I feel good sandesh was you press out that cheese, you know, on a nice whatever marble or countertop. It's very, very smooth. There's no little pieces. You don't feel pieces. It's totally smooth. And then that, and the formula was 1/4 sugar. And then you put that in your wok on a low, medium flame, and you work it until it starts to come off the sides. You don't overdo it, or then the sugar will crystallize and then you've ruined it. So you have to do it up to a point where it becomes dry. It should be dry, at least my understanding, and proper sandesh is dry because you make it properly, as Prabhupada said, it will keep for a week, even without refrigeration. And that was by far, he would have that sweet more than anything. And it's not even so much a sweet as he would even take it as like a tonic. Sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning, he would call me for a piece of sandesh because he was feeling hungry or something as he was doing his translating. So he would take that just to get some energy. It's just cheese. It's just cheese with a little sugar in it. Okay. So we're not going to see you tomorrow night. Or the following Sunday, is that right? You'll have a new Sunday program?
There, the temple has program, Prabhuji, Sunday evening, but tomorrow we have His Holiness Loknath Maharaj. So that's why we had to request you. So
that's okay.
Next weekend, Krishna willing, we will continue both the days, Prabhuji.
Okay.
Thank you so very much, Prabhuji. We are very grateful to you.
What spices?
She's saying we have a couple more. I mentioned the spices.
Okay.
Oh, what was it about directly? Yes, Jai Radha Devi Dasi. Yes, I prepared Prabhupada's lunch, put it on the plate, and walked into his room, set it down on the table, and offered it to him because he was right there. There was no having to say prayers. When we say prayers, I'm not offering to Krishna, I'm offering to Prabhupada. The way he taught us, we offer through the disciplic succession up to Krishna, not that we offer to Krishna directly. But when Prabhupada was here, I would just cook and bring it to him. There was no offering to the deities on the altar or deities in his room. He would take it and he would eat it. When we traveled on the airplanes, we would sit down. Prabhupada sat at the window. I sat next to him. Next to me would be secretary. And we would offer it to Prabhupada. And as soon as he started eating, it became prasadam. And then we could take prasadam anytime after that. So we just followed Prabhupada and Prabhupada's mood and what he did. Everything Prabhupada did was Krishna conscious. Everything was prasadam. Everything is mercy of Krishna. When one's Krishna conscious, there's no question. As I said, just seeing Prabhupada with his hand on his forehead, you would see Krishna consciousness, the way Prabhupada applied his tilak, the way he ate, sitting there just very quietly. You actually saw him honoring Krishna prasadam. It was very wonderful to see Prabhupada do everything.
Okay. Do you think about making the offering to Srila Prabhupada with cooking? Or is your consciousness more thinking of Krishna, as you said, Govardhan?
They're asking me my consciousness when I'm cooking. do I think of Prabhupada, offering to Prabhupada, or do I think about offering to Krishna or my Govardhan? I have my Govardhan. To tell you the truth, I think about what it is I'm cooking. So it turns out nicely. I'm actually on a very low level of consciousness. I don't think a lot about who I'm offering it to until when I cook for Prabhupada. Of course, I always understood I was bringing it to Prabhupada, but my consciousness was just trying to get it right so that it was a nice offering. Once he got a letter from one of his early disciples asking when they performed arati ceremony and when they were offering to the different parts of the body, you know, what should they meditate? And Prabhupada said, you're offering it to the part of the body. That's what you meditate on, what you're doing. So it's a good thing, especially in the kitchen. If your consciousness is anywhere else, it's very easy to slip up, to burn something, to miss something, to overdo something. So the whole thing is to concentrate, I think, on the offering. At least for me, that's what I do. I try to concentrate on the offering. And when I was with Prabhupada, I was successful we can say it's always by Radharani's mercy, how when you're in the kitchen, everything is the mercy of Srimati Radharani. So she's empowering us. So these things are always there. When I think about chapati puffing up, it still amazes me the fact that they puff up. Just that. I remember the first time I saw a chapati puff up, to me it was like mystical. It was a mystical thing to see a chapati puff up. To see a puri puff up, I thought it was magic. But and in a sense, cooking it's more than Prabhupada said. It's more than just throwing some spices in a chance. Cooking, there's more to it than that. You really like everything we do. You want to give it your full attention, and if you do that, then I think everything can work out. Okay.
Thank you so very much.
Hare Krishna.
I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you. Always nice to see you, Prabhu. I'm happy to see you. I like seeing your home there. It looks very beautiful. Nice Krishna conscious place. Who's that in the background?
My son.
What do you have in your hands?
Nothing, Prabhuji.
Hmm? What did I see in your hands?
Nothing. There's nothing, Prabhuji.
Nothing. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you. Bless you all. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna. Hi. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, devotees. So I hope everybody relished the katha. And today was special because of prasadam. Prasadam is also always dear to devotees. So thank you so very much. Have a good night's sleep. And tomorrow morning, we have two things. One is the IDC. Those who are doing IDC, they have IDC online test, 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. His Grace SrutaKirti Prabhu is here. And then we have Harinam Chintamani from His Holiness Priti Vardhan Maharaj. And tomorrow is going to have question answers on Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru. So Ronnie Prabhu shared the notes. Please read them. Evening, we'll have His Holiness Loknath Maharaj, who will address all the Gurgaon devotees. So we won't have SrutaKirti Prabhu's class tomorrow evening. So thank you so very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.